Let me just invite Manish Chandra, CEO of Poshmark, and Kailesh from Ernst & Young to have a conversation between the two organizations. Manish and Kailesh.
Okay. Oh, this is on. Excellent. Good afternoon, everybody. Great to be here on stage with you, Manish. I'm a huge fan of Manish, and what we're going to listen to in the next 30 minutes or so is a lot about how Manish's journey started, his early years from India to the US, entrepreneurship, and Poshmark for sure, and then certainly get his thoughts as a leader and CEO in today's world. And before we get started, because I'm sure the audience wants to listen to you more than me, but I will just say on behalf of Manish and I, for those moms in the room, I hope you had a wonderful Mother's Day celebration yesterday. And those that celebrated Eid last week, Eid Mubarak, and we had Cinco de Mayo last week. Isn't it great we can live in a place where you can recognize, celebrate, and respect all these wonderful things? So hopefully you all enjoyed the celebrations. Manish, let's jump right into it. Maybe we'll start with your early life and how you started in India and then came over to the US.
Yeah, in many ways, my early life is probably similar to a lot of you. I grew up in UP in a small town and spent a lot of my summers in Delhi. One of the things that influenced my growing up was actually spending time with my grandfather, who was a merchant and had a pharmaceutical shop in Chandni Chowk. And I'd spent a lot of time. And during those days, when you're 8 or 9 years old, you're allowed to roam around freely. So you saw a lot of bazaar, and from there came sort of, because for me to be in fashion business or even in retail, coming from a technology background is unusual. That was one thing. I think the second thing was I left home pretty early. I left home when I was 15 years old and went to IIT Kanpur. And so that was kind of an interesting thing to be able to travel 9 or 10 hours, and do that all alone, especially when we see how we protect our kids here. And it was a different thing. And then I came to this country when I was 19 years old, and I came here to do a PhD. And the interesting thing with that was I went to UT Austin, and they had a drinking law where you couldn't drink before you were 21. So I was teaching these kids, but I myself was not legally allowed to drink when I came to the country. But it was a fun journey, and then I came to Silicon Valley in '89 after I finished my master's degree and started my career with Intel, not far from here actually. And then soon realized that my passion was more in databases and joined a small company at that time. So Intel was maybe about 8,000 people at that time. And then I joined a smaller company, which was Sybase, which had about 80 people. That company grew to about a few thousand people, went public. It was sort of my first taste of seeing a public company. Then I joined another company, which was about 8 people, called, at that time it was called Vision Software, eventually became Versata. We took that company public probably in the last bit before the dot-com crash happened, which was 2000 March. That company went public, saw another company going through a public process, and then left Versata in 2001 when September 11th was happening. So this is 20 years back. It's hard to remember at that time. And it was kind of like the same kind of thing. Stock market was crashing, the world was crashing, the world was burning down. And at that time, I actually ended up partnering with a small startup, and we worked. And at that time, it was very hard to raise money. So we ended up selling it to a public company, spent a few years there, and then realized that I'd done, 8,088, and I think it was time to start with a startup of one, and that's sort of my journey to entrepreneurship started.
That's incredible. And this is the first, I think, a Longhorn not drinking. So I'll have to remember that one. Now, clearly, the entrepreneurship spirit is in you. How and when did that really start? And was it with Caboodle, I think, that eventually you sold in 2005?
Yeah, so Caboodle was my first journey. Actually, I'd started a small sort of side project back in 98, 99. But really, a lot of the companies I joined were startups. So they were classic Silicon Valley startups. And Caboodle was the first one where we put together a team. One of my co-founders came from the company I was with called Versant, and another one came from Versata. And we started in our garage. The interesting thing was we started with a focus on home remodeling and collaboration around home remodeling. And ultimately, it became a fashion, social fashion company. And none of us were really into fashion at that time. So it was kind of an interesting transformation over the next few years in transforming a company which was focused on home remodeling, collaboration, making it social, inventing the term social shopping, which today is very common. But back in 2005, 2006, when we first came up with the term social shopping, people was like, why should shopping be social? And it sort of felt natural to a few of us. But I looked around, and we were in a room of, many of the, actually everyone in that was a man, and everyone was 40 plus. And for them, shopping was very search and slicing and dicing oriented. And the way we were looking at shopping was more browsing, moving around, casually putting things together, taking things out, having conversations. So it was sort of very unfamiliar. And here we are 15 years later, and shopping is social, and everyone thinks of shopping is social.
Well, clearly fashion has done you well because you're looking very sharp. I think we need a little makeover. In those early years, what was it like being an entrepreneur and starting a company, just growing? Any lessons learned that, because I often get asked this question of, was it so different then as it is today? And
yeah, I mean, I think each phase of building a company at each stage is different. First company, I think everyone thinks you're a fool, so it's very hard to get funding. People don't respect you. Second company, you have to make sure you don't act as a fool, because everyone thinks you're not a fool, which means the chances of becoming a fool is much higher. So you have to try in different ways. First company, for the first round, we raised $1.5 million, and it was made up of checks of $25K, $50K, $80K, $100K. And then we went to meet with this guy who I thought would maybe give us a $75K check. He was into construction. He was a builder. And we met with him, and it's funny, Kanwal had sent me to meet with him. And I go into his office, and I was sitting there, like, I was looking at him like, I don't know how he's going to understand my business. And he brings his 13-year-old granddaughter to look at and do some due diligence on the company because it was in social shopping space. And I'm like thinking, this is not going to get funded, right? And so we have this conversation. He goes, Manish, why don't you go and let me think about how much I want to invest. And initially, the amount we were thinking he'd put is like $100,000. And so I thought, well, he's going to put $25K. So I'm driving to the airport. It's a long trip. You spend $500 of hard-earned cash, all of that. I reached the airport, and suddenly I got a call from Kanwal. He said, Manish, did you see Ed's email? I said, what? He's committed $600,000. And why, you would ask? And that's where sometimes, the India connection is so powerful. So he had put $600,000 into a company with the same name with a guy called Chandra, which happened to be KB Chandrasekhar. And it was Exodus. And he had made $600 million. So he didn't quite make that much money, but he did put $600,000 in my company.
Oh, wonderful story. Now, and so then Caboodle was sold in 2005, and clearly the entrepreneurship bug was still with you, because then you went on to start up Poshmark and become the CEO in 2011? How did that come about?
So Caboodle got acquired by Ernst in 2007. And in 2.5 years, it was an early sort of journey. And we became part of Hearst magazines. And so if you think about those 5 years, if you've read Malcolm Gladwell's book, he says, to really specialize in something, you spend 10,000 hours. So those 5 years were my 10,000 hours in fashion. So when I came out, I had deep appreciation of how interesting and how many unsolved problems were there in fashion. And then when you look at fashion, it's also extremely wasteful. It's one of the most wasteful businesses. So when you look at the waste that fashion was creating, and you combine with the opportunities, and then we looked at our own closet, which was full of stuff that was not worn, the opportunities started to come together. But in Silicon Valley, one of the things I always look for is technology movements. So in 2010, when I was leaving Hearst, there was a device called iPhone 4 that was coming to market. It was about this big, if you guys remember at that time, had great resolution, great camera, and I thought this was phenomenal. And the way I learned it is we were in a vacation, and this guy took a photo, and he was able to publish it on Facebook. And here I was with my camera, taking out my SD card, trying to plug it in. It wasn't working. And so I committed to it. So for 6 months, I said, I'm going to do everything on the phone, banking, Word, PowerPoint. So it was on my iPhone and iPad. And after doing that for 6 months, I realized this platform is going to work. And so we bet the farm in creating an application for it. And in fact, with Poshmark, our bet was it was going to be 100% mobile, 100% iPhones. We didn't have a website, 100% social. We didn't have a search bar. And we were going to take care of everything from shipping to discovery, et cetera. So we took on a lot, we realized later on. But that was sort of the bet. So it was very focused. And a lot of people were not necessarily believers at that time, because people thought commerce can't be done on phone right now. You need to have a website. And we said, we're not going to have a website. People said, you need search. We said, we're not going to have search. And so all of that kind of led to a series of disbelief. Luckily, we found some believers in Mayfield and Inventors and a few other companies, and we started that journey.
It's so easy to forget 2010, 2011 because we're so used to what we see today, but it was a very different world. And iPhone 4, goodness, my kids would say that was the Stone Age. But now, I know people know about Poshmark, but tell them a little bit about the business. And I do understand it's in the US, Canada, Australia, India. Big presence in India?
Yeah, so the business is super simple. I mean, we allow anybody with a closet to sell their fashion online. And from there, you can purchase fashion online. We provide you with all shipping, protection, etc. As a business, we don't touch inventory, so the products go from seller to buyer directly. Just to give you a sense of scale of the business, we have a little over 80 million users, and last year they transacted over $1.8 billion worth of items, which is all of the items that did not go into a landfill and actually went across the country and in different countries. So far, we actually don't support inter-country commerce, but within the country, they move around. The magic of the platform is that it is not just a commerce platform, it's also a social platform. And we started with a focus on women, we've expanded to men. And people spend a fair bit of time on the platform, talking, connecting, discovering, shopping. And so on an average, people spend, in the mid-20s kind of time. And there's a lot of engagement. And prior to COVID, there was a lot of physical events that people used to do. So people would throw these live events, parties, get together over the weekend. And it's exciting because just recently, as COVID is sort of flowing back, and it's great to see everyone here physically, we're starting to see some of these events come back.
I have friends and family and colleagues who use Poshmark, and they tell me the first place they go to in the mornings, because of that social aspect, is Poshmark versus any of the other social media platforms. So clearly it's working. If I've got this right, you have a sale every second, I believe, in the US, and maybe 200 million plus items.
Yeah, I lost
some big numbers
track.
there.
I lose track,
So now Poshmark is doing well, and then it went public 2021?
2021, yeah.
How was that whole experience?
It was really an interesting experience because we started our roadshow on a date that you might be familiar with, January 6, 2021. And we were pitching morning till evening, me and my CFO, and I'm getting texts on stuff happening which seemed kind of unreal on the phone. And I didn't realize what was happening. So we were there pitching. And at the end, when we reached the hotel room, it was like kind of crazy because this was all still on Zoom. We were in, I forget which strain of our virus was crazy at that time. And so for the first 4 days, in an IPO, you sort of go out, you pitch, you start to get orders, and you start to sort of get subscriptions. For the first 4 days, our order count was 0. And it was very hard to imagine what was happening. And I have full faith, we had a great business, we are pitching a good business. Well, it turned out because of what happened on January 6th, nobody had a chance to put their models together, analysts to put their models together, and that's how sort of you make the bids. So people were freaking out. We were running into a weekend, and there was a freaking out going on, and I was like, no, it's going to all work out. And people were all over the map. And on Monday, I remember, that's when we got the flood of orders, and we sort of got oversubscribed. And then people were like, now let's price this to some crazy price. And so to me, I think the lesson that sort of comes in, which is a lesson even in these crazy times, is that quite often when we are trying to make a decision, we either approach it from a point of fear, and then from fear we quickly swing to greed. And that seems to be the normal modus operandi of making decisions. If we can just say, what is the love direction? Where do you have to be? And if you remain in the love direction, you're likely to succeed. And that's why the first value at Poshmark is lead with love.
That's wonderful. Congratulations as well. That's just wonderful. Now, having worked with you, and I've known you for a while, I know you're very passionate and caring about your employees and staff and the organization. So as a leader and CEO over the last 2-3 years, how have you been navigating through all these world challenges? And there's certainly a lot.
It's been difficult, of course, for everyone. I think the amount of angst, the amount of separation, the amount of anxiety that people have felt has been unprecedented. And even as the world is opening up, people are anxious in a different way. So to me, I think it's a few things. One of our core values is embrace your weirdness, which is as much as recognizing that each of us are individual and each of us are unique, but also more importantly, have empathy with the other person, because you may look completely normal from the outside and a lot could be going on inside. And I think that value has served us well, because so many people have joined the company but they had never physically met anybody. And so the ability to sort of connect with them, talk to them was powerful. I think the other thing is that people's belief systems have evolved and changed in different directions. And I think it's important to recognize that and have that dialogue as you come together. And then the third thing is the foundation of what makes us and what we want to come for work has not changed. We still want to grow, we still want to connect, we still want to help people. And so if you recognize that and you recognize these three things, it's easy to bring these things together. So we've done a lot of things, and more recently, if you go back to the middle of last year, I was firmly of the belief that we're going to get everyone in the office by August of 21. Of course, that went in, it was not to be. But today, sort of what we've done is created something called Posh Connect, where people can call up and say, I'm going to get 30 people, 50 people, and we'll organize the full thing in the office or at an event. And that seems to be very successful in bringing people together and connecting without forcing a specific program on people. And you can throw it in a different city. We now have 40, 50 people who've migrated to New York, and somebody just went to New York and called a Posh Connect there, and 40, 50 people showed up. So I don't know what future of work looks like, but I think the human connection is still going to be part of our future.
Oh, that's wonderful, and thank you for your leadership in that. Let me pivot a little bit to you just as a leader, as a CEO in today's world, and a lot of people look to you. And maybe the first question, can you share some of your lessons learned as being a CEO and leader of an early stage, and as the business has matured, and then a public company, and what kind of things have you learned along that journey?
Sure. I think first to me is, when you believe in something, don't give up. And when we started Poshmark, me and my co-founders, Tracy, Gautam, and Chetan, we had a very strong belief that we wanted to have a specific solution to this problem. We wanted people to be very much participating in e-commerce, but not having to think that they were sellers or buyers. So we took a specific way in which we wanted to do payments, specific way in which we wanted to do shipping, specific way in which we wanted to build the app. And each of those things, it was a lot to bite off, to be honest. It took 2 years to kind of get it together. But in that journey, we had times where USPS wanted to shut down our business, wanted to arrest us. We had every single payment processor in the country who shut us down, every single one of them. And then one of them signed us. As we went to implement, they said we need 3 months of escrow, which was 9 times the amount of money we had in the bank. So we had to kind of fight. And then ultimately, fortuitously, Braintree got acquired by PayPal, and PayPal and Braintree had individually rejected us, but when they came together, they were able to accept us and became our partner. With USPS, we were successful in creating a very unique shipping partnership called PoshPost, which is still enduring, and it has allowed shipping to be very simple. So for me, I think the first thing is to really believe in what you're believing in, remain focused, remain narrow, and work through the pieces. Be adaptable, but remain there. The second thing is, everything that's small can become big. And there's no idea that's small. It's more how you imagine it. And the way I kind of think about it is, if you think of a coffee cup, somebody looked at a coffee cup and visualized a coffee cart in it. Somebody looked at the coffee cup and visualized a coffee shop in it. Somebody may have visualized a series of coffee shops, but somebody looked at coffee shops and visualized a whole Starbucks in it, right? So the power is not in the coffee cup. The power is in the imagination. And in some ways, when I go back to 11 years and talk about buying and selling secondhand fashion unseen without touching the products, people used to think I was crazy. And if you think today and you turn to Nordstrom, you turn to Lululemon, you turn to Gap, everyone wants to sell secondhand today. So secondhand has become so pervasive that the world has turned around. That's beyond my imagination, but that tells you that craziest things can become real. And then the third thing is, I think, ultimately it boils down to people and humanity. And what's really powerful is that ultimately we are all serving someone. And for me, it's always about serving our community. And when we look at to our community, their passion and their sort of belief in us has been very powerful, which ultimately manifests in our cohorts being very powerful. And so what you see with Poshmark is that people are extremely loyal through decades, through years. even at the employee levels, all of my co-founders are still with my journey. Our first 10 employees are still working 11 years later in Poshmark through the ups and downs. So to me, that's very exciting, and that's part of the journey we are on.
Well, that's fantastic, and congratulations again. And I know I won't ask you too many details about Poshmark with your earnings coming up. You or I don't want to end up in the bad side of UCC.
Thank you. That's where your background really helps.
Let me ask a question. As an entrepreneur, so you've been an early stage entrepreneur and to a public company, and how do you keep that entrepreneurial spirit and energy going? Because it requires a lot from you and a lot of kind of hard work and focus and passion, because you still need it even for a public company, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I feel like every 5 or 6 years, particularly in Silicon Valley, things change, and you have to sort of adapt to it and think about it. And even as we look at the last 2 years, so many things are changing. I mean, crypto, blockchain, augmented reality, virtual reality, metaverse, and you have to sort of adapt to it, think about it, see its relevance. But in that is also the joy of living. I think part of the fun of being in Silicon Valley is the adaptation and innovation. And to me, in innovation comes opportunities, and in opportunities are possibilities. So that's been very fun. I mean, if you go back 30 years back when I started my career, I was doing semiconductor, working on 386, 486 at a company called Intel. And I don't think most people recognize what the 386, 486 is. And today, you know, working on fashion, which is physical fashion, tomorrow maybe virtual fashion, who knows?
Let me ask a question as a leader. I mean, I've realized over the last 2-3 years, the role of a CEO is not just running the company, you're in the public spotlight. And so maybe what kind of is top of mind for you? What keeps you awake with so many things going on in the world? The things that you focus on or that you're passionate about?
Yeah, for me, I think right now it's the health of our community. So when I think of the health of our customer community, I think of our employee community, and to some degree, our stock owner community overall. And I think what I'm seeing is that there's just different kinds of pain, consternation that are there. And while it may not make logical sense looking at it, when you go talk to people, you try to understand. In that are seeds of innovation and growth. And so to me, I think just trying to understand where people are coming from. Just this morning, we were at our executive team meeting, and there was a big discussion going on between my chief people officer and my chief operating officer on in-person work. It was very intense. And the interesting thing is, when you look at it, they're both coming from a very good place, you know, what they're thinking about. And the world is changing. So when you look at this much data, you can come to this much conclusion. When you look at this much data, you come to this much conclusion. And after a while, that conclusion may change and evolve. So it's a very interesting time for, in some ways, being indecisive, because indecisive, you can actually give yourself the optionality to have a better decision outcome. So I'm starting to realize that in this world, being slightly indecisive may be better than being completely decisive.
That's great advice. And I know we're just about done with our time, Manish, but maybe just before we finish here, any other words of advice for this group at all, or any other thoughts you want to share? Otherwise, we'll close.
No, my only advice would be enjoy life. It's too short, as we've realized.
Great advice. Please, a round of applause, Manish.